bring up the Congo and the
Yes.
conflict that seems to be taking place there. Can you explain why there's a conflict in the Congo? And let's step into that one before we close.
Yeah, I mean, this has been going on. I mean, this is the most shameful and awful situation that's been going on. More than 10 million people have died. The genocide happening in the Eastern Congo is just unacceptable. And at the heart of it is basically the search for resources. It's been happening since 1884, 1885, when the Europeans were scrambling for resources in Africa. And the Congo has been one of the places where, the harshness of the Belgian Congo king, King Leopold, has taken place. And of course, it's still ongoing. And there it's about the resources, you know, um, all sorts of resources, including the resources that we know that are, rare earth minerals that are powering, the cell phone industry and other very important industries around the world. Uranium that was used in Nagasaki and then Hiroshima, because they had some really good consistency, density. In fact, we're aware that Einstein sent a letter to President, I think it was Roosevelt or so, telling him, please don't leave this high pure uranium in the hands of Black people. They don't deserve to be running this and managing it. So it is still ongoing. That is the source of the problem in that place, as it is for in many places. But in the Congo, it's now done by proxy. So big companies, Apple, Samsung, and all sort of other big companies are using those proxies. And one country and one leader that's been accused of playing that game, there are two of them. The first one is President Kagame of Rwanda, and then the second one is President Museveni of Uganda. And as you know, they've been really strong. They've positioned themselves very strongly in that region where they're using, there are more than 100 groups of quote unquote rebels in that eastern DRC country that are exploiting and extracting and selling those minerals. According to some report by the United Nations, Kigali has now become the capital of commerce, a trade area where people can sell all these minerals. And Rwanda doesn't have all these minerals. But President Kagame, Paul Kagame, has always been in denial, even with the evidence that's there. And many people are dying. Recently, 14 South African soldiers died there at the hands of a movement called the M23, which is supported by President Kagame. There's plenty of evidence for that. But Kagame has still been in denial. Last week, there was a meeting in East Africa. There was some kind of fighting over, who to blame and so forth. They managed to come out of there, but nothing is cleared yet. It's still very, very tricky. And the tension is there among African leaders who are now playing the game. They've become the toys and the proxy from outsiders. This is exactly the thing that many people and many Africans have been dreading for decades. And it's still going to go on until Africans can control their territory. The DRC is about 2 million and more, 2,600,000 or 400,000 square kilometers. This is a huge country, right? About, I think, the US is 9 million. So 2 million, roughly, you got about a fourth of the United States. So it's difficult to police, but also the leaders of the countries themselves are not as good as we would have hoped.
What's wild about that, I don't know if people have read King Leopold's Soliloquy. It was by Mark Twain. And that book opened my eyes to what was taking place in the Congo. This genocide that was taking place. And just for the audience, if they haven't read the book, Mark Twain, the entire book is a soliloquy. It is the point of view of the leader of the Congo and the Belgian king, I believe at the time.
Leopold.
And he was King Leopold, and he was given this excuse. The entire book is an excuse. It's we got to do this. We're doing the right thing. This isn't horrible. I know a lot of people are getting killed, but we didn't really have a choice. and these people being killed. The entire book is almost this kind of weird soliloquy of him giving his reasons and justifications for a genocide dealing with rubber in the Congo. It is fascinating.
That's
And
right.
so it's disheartening, 200-300 years later, that we're still here having this similar conversation, even though it's now Africans that are effectively running it. Do you see any
Yes. I mean,
progress towards peace in this at all?
I don't see any progress at this stage. It's going to take a bit more time. I mean, even the African Union that met this past week is still struggling to find a way around it. I mean, the African Union spends more time going sending envoy to Ukraine. Remember the last time a couple of years ago with Chairman Macky Sall going to beg
Right.
for food. I mean, it's just unthinkable sometimes how our leaders behave. We don't know what they're smoking and what's going on, or if they're under threat. There's an energy. I mean, I have to say this. I say this all the time to colleagues. I just don't understand what's going on. They sign contracts that don't make sense about minerals. I use this Chinese metaphor. It's called the beggar with the golden bowl. So Africans
I
are
love it.
they're sitting on gold, yet so it's a story about that beggar. He has a golden bowl. Every morning he wakes up and go and begs with that golden bowl. And somebody asked him one day, he said, but wait a minute, do you know what you're begging with? You have something, do you know what it is? And the beggar didn't know what it was. But it sort of hinted at, and the guy had to tell him, look, this is gold. Where did you get it? Say I found it somewhere else. So that means there's more gold where the beggar found it. And he can't make a case, but he goes around begging. It's the same thing today what African leaders are doing. They have a golden bowl. They go around pretending that they're looking for foreign direct investment, while there's tons of resources they can use to get the money they need to develop their countries and the continent. It's just shameful and unacceptable again.
But why do they miss it? I guess is the question. Because you're right, Africa is full of resources, full of things that they can pull out of the earth. I mean, that part of the reason for colonization, right, was that, hey, look at this rich country that we can now exploit. Okay, so why can't the African Union do that? Why don't they do that? Why don't they see it as a golden
Because they're
bowl?
captured. Jamal, they're captured. All our leaders who are there either are, I wouldn't say uneducated, but the greed elements that's with them is that they always have to depend on somebody else. It's just unthinkable. You take Angola. Angola doesn't need foreign direct investment from the United States. South Africa doesn't, because the private sector here is flush with everything. And they have minerals that you can't find anywhere. I mean, you and I talked about this a couple of years ago. Remember iridium?
Yes.
That mineral, rare. South Africa is the first producer of it, right? 1 ton apparently costs billions. South Africa is first producer. And guess who's the second producer, as we discussed it a couple of years ago? Haiti.
That's
Haiti
right.
is the second, yes. And the place where the area where the iridium is kept is now under the control of US troops.
Of course. Of
So,
course.
so those leaders are now, they have some kind of allegiance to outsiders. For some reason, they can't figure it out. That's one of the reasons what's happening in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger is such almost a revolution, because these leaders are saying, we like you. You said to us that we've been poor for many years, and we're asking you, please leave us alone. We will develop. The World Bank and the IMF went to Burkina Faso and said, look, you've just paid off your loan, but we still want to loan you money. President Ibrahim Traore said, please, I don't want your money. Leave us alone. We'll organize it. And that's the kind of sovereignty that is missing with other African countries that most people in Africa are now thirsting for. I mean, you can see the youth, people. I mean, this young president, military guy, has become like Che Guevara or some other. I mean, he's idolized everywhere. And so it's not about the fact that he's idolized, but it's that the idea and the ideal behind this position is so powerful. It's liberating. It has a sense of sovereignty, and people want that sovereignty, being politically, economically, minerals, and so forth. That's what they want. But most of our leaders are stuck into this slave sort of begging bowl mentality that they can't really get out of them. But it could be that they're pledged, I don't know what it is that they pledged, maybe blood, they're part of secret societies. We don't know. Yeah. And now we're stuck with these guys. They can't think. I mean, look at Cameroon, President Biya, for more than 40 years. He's 92. He hasn't done much with the wealth of his country. Take Gabon, same thing. I mean, all these countries have wealth. Same for Uganda. Uganda is just sitting. I mean, I was telling you last year on your old show that there was a discovery of a gold deposit that was estimated at 13 trillion US dollars.
Oh,
13 trillion. I mean, Jamal, and guess what? It's disappeared out of the news. When it comes to gold, there's a mafia, it seems, that takes all these stories out of the news. I wrote about it I think last year or the year before. I mean, with such a deposit, what would you do? You don't
anything
need
you
more
want.
money.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it's shocking. I don't know how our leaders are thinking. There's something warped in their system, and that's what needs to really being destroyed or reset.
Explain the African Union for a moment. And so all of these countries are included in the African Union, including the Sahel states, meaning the Sahel states that effectively said, we are going this alone if we need to. And we believe in sovereignty. We are going to change over. We're getting rid of the French. We're getting rid of the Americans. We are going to do this differently. They are also part of the African Union, correct?
Yes, they are. I mean, the African Union is a membership organization of 55 African countries, 55 officially, but let me tell you why 55. Normally it should be 54. The UN recognized 54 African nations, but the African Union recognizes 55, which recognizes one country is not yet a country, Western Sahara, which was under the Spaniards, under Spain for many, many, many decades. And then in 1975, the Spanish government decided to withdraw, and that came under, they just sort of legged it to Morocco, but it's still very, very tenuous. So the African Union recognizes that portion as one country, right? So, but it still creates a little bit of tension between Morocco and other countries. If you see the map that's behind me, you see there's a boundary there between, you see Morocco up north there?
Yes.
And then there's this boundary. So the space and the land below there, you can see Western Sahara. Now, I need to warn you, don't make this mistake to take this map to meet with the Moroccan executive or go to Morocco. You will be in huge diplomatic trouble. But anyway, so the AU, the African Union, became African Union in around, I think, 2000, under the leadership of South Africa. In fact, I was part of some of these things here in South Africa. It was a big transition, moving from the African organization Unity to the African Union. And that AU is what we know today. But it doesn't have teeth at all. The three countries you mentioned, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, are still members of the African Union. They haven't left it. They've only left the Economic Community of West African States, which is ECOWAS, because they disagree with some of the things that ECOWAS is doing. And one of the reasons is they believe both ECOWAS and the African Union are doing the bidding of the European Union, the United States, and the G7. And they wanted to claim their sovereignty away from it. In fact, the African Union is known as a toothless organization, fragmented. Its budget is supplied by the European Union to a 2/3. I mean, how do you do that? Its headquarters.
Did you say
headquarters,
2/3 of the African Union's budget is paid by the European Union? Are you serious?
Yes, European Union. Yes. And then its headquarters was built, quote unquote, for free by China. Now, how do you want people to take you seriously when you don't even own what you pretend to share with the rest of the world as an ideal of union, that you can't pay for it? They can't even pay for most of the security and military intervention. The UN does put some money, the European Union puts some money, but largely all, if not most of their activities funded by the foreigners outside. It just doesn't make sense, Jamal. It doesn't make sense to many of us,
That is mind
and and
blowing.
and, and it's not even enough money. Somewhere, not even close to half a billion, not even a billion. One country can provide the budget of the African national, not the African Union in just one chunk. Gaddafi was doing part of that. In fact, that's one of the reasons it was taken away. And so African leaders don't seem serious about their own union, their own organization. So they're not putting the resources where the mouths are. So they're always reacting to issues. And it's sad to see that.
Well,
But people are still hoping. People are still hoping that the situation will change with the youth. People are now being aware of what's going on, that in the next coming decades or maybe generation, the Africans will own the African Union, that they'll pay for what the union is supposed to be paying for.
I guess my issue is Europeans right now are finding themselves in this kind of weird box where America's like, all right, we're done. You guys figure it out. And they're freaking out. And it's like,
well, J.D. Vance told them that last week, didn't he?
Oh man, he gave them a tongue lashing, and they don't like that tongue lashing. I mean, he effectively talked down to them like they were children. Yeah, you have these liberal values, but you don't really believe in these liberal values. So there's that. And by the way, he was right in that speech. The hypocrisy aside, he was right. I guess my thing is Europe is finding it the hard way that America doesn't care. And that just doesn't care has been pretty clear. We will have negotiations with Russia. We will have negotiations with China. You will not be in the room. And so Europe is realizing where they are in regards to the way America thinks of them. And we think of them as, you're not serious. You're not a real power. You guys are in a fantasy land. All of this talk about war with Russia is nonsense. I guess my feeling is the European Union giving 2/3 of support to the African Union means that the African Union is not in charge of its own, let's say, faculties.
Finances.
Finances. I mean, but it's not just finances. It's what those finances mean. 2/3 of paying for it is called control. Yes, it's sovereignty. And so the African Union at some point is going to have this come to Jesus moment of dealing with their own sovereignty issues beyond what the European Union is effectively controlling right now. That's astonishing. 2/3. That is mind-blowing. Like, we just found out that USAID was giving all of this money all across the world. Now, we understood, a lot of people understood that USAID was doing this. National Endowment for Democracy were doing this. These were cutouts for what the CIA wanted in regards to affect the global agenda that was in the interest of the United States. If that meant overthrowing elections, if that meant putting a bunch of money into media, we did it. What does it mean when 2/3 of the organization is paid for by Europe? That is an astonishing thing. I had no idea that number was that extreme. I guess,
but I'm not cutting you off, but Jamal, you're so right. It's not only about the finances, but the European Union have people who call themselves observers. They're called permanent observers within the African Union, next to the chairperson, next to every other committee to tell them what to do. And in fact, Israel also tried to get a permanent observer there, but this became so controversial. In fact, I think it was last year or so, or the year before, Tiffany Levy, I think, who was the person who was there, she was dragged out. And, they said, if you're not leaving, you got to leave this place because we don't want you. Israel, we don't want Israel here. So they're inside, they wormed themselves inside the African Union, so much so that beside the money, they control all the small projects, the processes, and what to do about, LGBTQ, transgender now is part of financing. If you don't do this, I mean, it's just almost unbelievable.
Wow, Kofi, that is mind blowing. That is mind blowing. I want the African Union to be the African Union. I want these countries to fight for their own self-interests. I want the world to be able to engage with each other as these countries push for their own self-interest and what's in their best self-interest. I am of mind that the world can come together and say, hey, you have things that you care about. And in the things that you care about, we can work with one another and dealing with it. It is impossible for the African Union to do that when 2/3 of it is paid for by Europe.
I fully agree with you.
That is
I mean,
amazing.
the part that was really shameful, it's just the nature, the quality of the leadership that's running these organizations is to put us to shame. They're organizing meetings, summits. I mean, they're all paperwork here and there, different parts. People are traveling. In fact, they had such a hard time during COVID time. Remember COVID time, there was restriction on traveling because people
Right.
couldn't get their per diems. All of them were so distraught because they wouldn't make money. And that really taught them a hard, hard, hard lesson, but they're now back into it. And nothing really is moving. The only thing I can tell you, the nature of the next communique that's going to come out at the next AU meeting, because it's just similarly cut and paste. Same thing all the time. They're thanking their leader for doing this. So and so is this. I mean, the diplomatic language is so sterile. Nothing really moves out of there. And one thing that really shamed many of us was, remember when the Ukraine conflict, or what the Russia called special operation, started? There was this big African committee that got together, including President Cyril Ramaphosa and former President Macky Sall of Senegal. And guess what they were going there to do? On the first item of the agenda was to beg for wheat, Russian wheat, Russian and Ukrainian wheat, because Africans were starving. Right. I mean, for goodness sake, this was a nonsense. Africans were not starving for Ukrainian wheat, nor Russian wheat, but they need the wheat anyway, And they made it so blatantly begging bold that you just saw these African leaders, and many of us looked at them and said, "Are these our leaders?" So they've forgotten the conflict and the genocide in the eastern side of the Congo, but they're now just flying over to Ukraine and Russia to beg for food.
Just amazing.
Yeah.
Koffi Kouakou, he is African analyst, senior research fellow for the Center of African China Studies at the University of Johannesburg. Kofi, my man, thank you for this. Always appreciate
Welcome,
these conversations.
And see you next time. All the best.
Absolutely. You have a good one, man. Be safe.
Talk to JD Vance.
I know, right? Have a good one, man. Be safe.